my hair. Okay. Story time. Lucille Bald. You never know just how much of a wimp you actually are until you listen to your own personal breakup song on endless repeat and cry like a little boy. I had a heartbreak. It happens. And it hurt, which happens as well. I make no apologies for the following, for I am not ashamed. It was just, well, what happened, And it happened because of James Blunt, the singer-songwriter. Lovely voice, sort of high-pitched and emotive. I had his first CD, it was a while ago, and my Discman, as I said. And in the first days of my new solitude, I hit play, and this song came on and reverted me. He strummed my pain with his fingers, sang my heart with his words. I was flacked. I stood stock still in the middle of the street, and as each phrase plucked effortlessly at the raw and pathetic remains of my poor heartstrings, it built into a critical mass, and suddenly I was crying on the sidewalk. About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and there's me blubbering and moaning on Sunset Boulevard, Los Angeles, California. No one much noticed, and if they did, they probably thought I was rehearsing an audition, or it maybe found out I didn't get the part. Thing is, pity is pitiful. I listened to that song, and then I walked to my little dark hole of an apartment, shut myself in, and cried like I had been needing to for a while. Okay, and this is where the story should end. But in my aching, loss-laden loserdom, I decided I needed to wallow. Over the next few days, I chose to listen to that song as often as it took for it to become the trigger to my feelings, to develop a sensory response to it. And in truth, I did need to be able to cry my sadness out. And well, I did. And if I went on too long without spontaneously bursting into shuddering sobs on my own, I just pressed play and Shazam, instant catharsis. And each time I cried to it, the emotional connection was reinforced. It got to the point where I had only to hear the first chord of the piano, and I would be incapacitated, even waiting for that chord. Like I said, pitiful. Grief is a funny thing, or it can be. From an observer's perspective, mostly, I know there were a few people who saw me during what I have come to refer to as my Lucille Ball episode, and I hope they laughed, though if they did I could not hear. I had the headphones on, you see, and was wailing aloud at the time. I got my hole, my little dark apartment, 3 days after the initial breakup. In sunny California, it was a bit of an anomaly. It was a bottom floor unit in a 3-story building that faced north, directly into the foot of the Hollywood Hills on Laurel Canyon. There was no building across the street. There was a sheer cliff of dirt, rock, and cacti about 400 feet high. Behind my building were 3 more 4-story apartment houses. I think the sun could be seen from my kitchen window for about 3 minutes in the early afternoon, but I may just be embellishing my memory. The furnishings were from about that time that Joni Mitchell and Jackson Browne were renting their first apartments here in 1969, a strange concoction of retro and just plain old, things that were kind of like IKEA, but that had been made long before the Swedes had conquered North America. The centerpiece was a sort of heavy-duty throw rug, 12 feet square, the pattern of orange, brown, and blue on white, mercifully faded with time and decades of sandal dust and potash, not the mineral. And shag so thick if you dropped anything smaller than a bread box on it, you might never find it again. Being a dark-hearted neo-hippie in the throes of self-induced lachrymosity, I had no problem with the decor, nor the location. The reverse corollary of the Blunt tune was actually a Joni Mitchell song from the early 70s, You Turn Me On, I'm a Radio, and I could listen to that, and it somehow made me happy, despite the situation. It did bother me, for some reason, that I had no vacuum, and the carpet was, as such, dirty and getting more so. It was so covered in dust that when I cried on it, a fine layer of mud was formed. I developed a plan. I would take it out to the clothesline in the courtyard and beat it with a broom like I'd seen in movies about Britain just after the war. seemed completely logical. Maybe less logical was my decision to carry out this plan on an afternoon on which I had decided to see just how far I could take my sorrowful idiocy. I sat in my little cave and listened to that damn song for 45 minutes straight, no exaggeration, crying the whole time, deep, gut-wrenching sobs that began somewhere in the floor beneath my toes and shuddered their way up my legs and torso, building silent momentum, then to finally mercifully burst out of my mouth into these horrible banshee wails that emptied my lungs completely, then kept pushing like that silence before the baby finally bellows again. Like Al Pacino at the end of Godfather 3 when his daughter is killed. Over and over, God knows what the neighbors thought. This seemingly endless display of noxious yawling. How long can he go on? Should we do something? Like what? Anything less than a mercy killing seems pointless. Do you still have that gun? Little could they know the howling hound of the Meskervilles would soon make an actual appearance. In retrospect, it makes a tiny bit of crazed sense. I was not going to stop crying. That would have taken me turning off the song, something I was not prepared to do. In truth, I didn't even think of it. But I might as well get on with life. I will give that carpet the beating I've been imagining for days. I found my broom and carried it outside. Well, carried is generous. I kind of half-dragged, half-toted the thing. It was heavy. I had no idea a piece of fabric could be so goddamn weighty. I guess all that shag wool, the woven hemp base, there was reason it had survived 40 years in a rental. It was thick. I wrestled it out the door and onto the front sidewalk, dragged it over to the clothesline like Jesus dragging the cross, but this was all floppy. At least that held a shape. I am crying and sobbing and now sweating, manhandling this disgustingly dirty, garish, psychedelic thing that was almost vertigo-inducing when seen in the light of day, even on my sad, shady little street. People driving by almost crashed into the light post, so startling was my appearance. After 4 hernia-inducing attempts, I managed to fling the thing onto the clothesline, which promptly sagged down almost to the ground, groaned once in protest, and then snapped. I cared not for the damage I was causing. Now I had to problem solve. There were a couple of metal posts that had held the now defunct clothesline. I grunted the thing over to one of them. It was only a foot across at the top end. The carpet looked like a Halloween ghost on acid. Even in my racked state, I knew there was not enough area available to do the beating. There was a big garbage bin there. I sweated and yowled my unwilling victim over to it and lay it on the top, which was slanted. Anyone watching me would have seen me put it on there, turn to get my broom, turn back in time to see it finish sliding off the bin and into a gaily colored puddle on the cement, and then see me burst into a keening wail, eyes blind with tears. My God, they might have thought he really needs to beat that rug. Do I have the mental health services number in my phone? I tried 3 times, no luck. The same slow slither to the ground repeated, the same tear-stained reaction on my part, stopping only to adjust my headphones and turn up the volume, to grunt and curse as frustration is heaped on sorrow. I haul it back out onto the street where my little VW Rabbit is parked. I managed to pull it, bedspread-like, over my little car, and stagger back to the courtyard to get the broom and proceed with my task. Must have looked like this crazy man who, despite a tear-inducing reluctance, needed to beat his car but didn't want to leave any incriminating bruises. Sweating, crying, wailing with each swing of the broom, I would pay anything to see what a spectacle I was. The postscript to this episode is that I now had conditioned myself to break into gasping sobs at the sound of this song. About 8 months later, I was traveling with my kids, who were 14, 13, and 8. We had hit Sedona, Arizona for a weird weekend, and we're driving back through the desert. The radio was on, and we were enjoying a road trip when it happened. I swear, there's a tiny pause in the recording before the first piano chord is struck, and I knew it. I knew it before it started playing what it was. It should be noted here that my children, while compassionate and caring, were not terribly sympathetic to the plight of their parents. Maria told me once that she was having a bad post-divorce day, kind of tried to invoke the understanding of Jera, who said, "Hey, you guys fucked this thing up, you gotta deal with it," and strode from the room. So having them watch their father burst into paroxysms of tear-gushing sorrow at the end of an already poorly handled weekend is not exactly the scene I was hoping for. But now it was inevitable. Time slowed as the intro dragged on. I am not much of a fight or flight guy. Freezing is my preferred response to panic or lack thereof. I couldn't even think to just reach over and switch stations, let alone shut the thing off. I watched my disillusion crawl inevitably at me from out of the speakers. And then, as the first word was warbled, all three kids joined in perfect key and with these kind of falsetto impersonations. "Did I disappoint you or let you down? Should I be feeling guilty? Let the judges frown." It's hard to explain. The subtlety of their mockery was beautiful. I started laughing, and the spell was broken. They sang every word. It seems the same sad song of lost love was in heavy rotation in their own home for a while after the break, which makes their sarcastic mimicry understandable and made me even more grateful for their humor. If I had broken down, they would all have snorted in disgust and shaken their heads, having seen my ex do the same at some earlier point in the year. That's the end. Thank goodness.